All right, we're good. We'll go ahead and call the meeting of the Cuyahoga County Committee of the Whole meeting for Monday, July 7, 2014 to order. If the clerk will please call the roll.
Calling the roll, Mr. Germana.
Here.
Mr. Gallagher.
Here.
Mr. Schrein.
Here.
Ms. Conwell. Ms. Conwell is absent at the moment. Mr. Jones. Mr. Jones is absent at the moment. Mr. Hairston.
Here.
Ms. Simon. Here. Ms. Connolly. Ms. Connolly is absent at the moment. Mr. Greenspan.
Here.
Mr. Miller.
Here.
Mr. Brady.
Here.
There is a quorum.
Very good, thank you. Any public comment related to the agenda?
Yes, Mr. Chair, Mr. Will Tarter.
We're going to reserve Mr. Tardy. He's going to speak to the first item of discussion. Just to remind the committee, this is a committee of the whole for the purpose of discussing charter amendments. We have 8 that were submitted. We heard 5 last week. We'll hear 3 today for the first time, and we'll be able to discuss any of the 8 that the council or that the committee would like to discuss after we hear the first 3. The first item on the agenda today will be Resolution 2014-0166. If the clerk would please read that item.
Resolution number 2014-0166, a resolution providing for the submission to the electors of the County of Cuyahoga an amendment to Article 3, Sections 3.05 and 3.06, enacting Article 14, Section 14.01 of the Charter of Cuyahoga County to remove party affiliation from elected county offices and declaring the necessity that this resolution become immediately effective.
Very good, thank you. Mr. Schrein is the author. If you would please address this item.
Yes. Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much. I bring this item before us as an item that was actually followed up with a minority opinion, of which Mr. Charter, I believe, was part of that from the Charter Review Commission when it came forward. The last Charter Review brought it forward as a minority opinion in regards to seeking to eliminate party affiliation from the elected offices of county council, of the county executive, and the prosecutor. As we all recall, we also, as a council, eliminated the use of party from the Board of Revision's individual panels. That was taken out at the last time, and it was endorsed and supported by the voters out there. Almost in a supermajority way, in which the vote of the people supported that concept. I truly believe that that this item is one in which the time is ripe. If you look at our communities out there, of the communities, I think 56 of our 59 communities all have nonpartisan elections for the mayor, for our council. So if anybody has previously served on their village councils or the city councils, they were elected in a nonpartisan manner. If they have served as mayor or intend to serve potentially as mayor in their communities, they too would be running in a nonpartisan race. So it, to me, makes the completion of that process whereby the highest elected offices in the county would also follow suit with all the other offices that that are here in the county. In regards to that also, there's certainly a lot of discussion about voters that are not part of the process. And by doing this, more or close to 50% of all the voters in Cuyahoga County are nonpartisan as far as independents. They do not take out a ballot in the primary. This would follow similar to what has been done in California out there, in that the two highest voters would go forward into the general election. Could be two people, regardless of what their party affiliation of a similar nature, could get the highest votes, and then they in turn would then go forward into the general election out there. So this is pretty simple, pretty straightforward, and I think it's actually been supported by the local League of Women Voters in the past, and so I think that this would be an area where it would be in keeping with what we as a council have done, I think, a very effective job in our first 3.5 years, and that is to keep partisan politics out of the 11 members of this panel, and this would just be reaffirming that. So that's my suggestion. I truly believe that if when we as council often say, as we did on issue 7 on the sin tax, that if we believe that this is something that the voters would support or not support, let's put it before the voters and actually get their opinions on this. And I really believe that this is an item that would be overwhelmingly supported by this county, and this council should follow forward and put this on the ballot on behalf of them, and make sure we do not let partisan politics enter into our vote to put that on the ballot. Thank you.
Very good, thank you. I believe Mr. Tarter would like to speak on this issue.
Thank you very much. Here we go. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and fellow, Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, county council members and members and guests. I wanted to just answer any questions on behalf of the Charter Review Commission. And basically to give a little bit of perspective on why we wrote this this report, this particular minority report. I don't want to speak on specifically on behalf of the League of Women Voters who did come before us, or the Citizens League, but I can say that we did hear testimony from the organization's Nancy Dietrich, who was on our commission, who is affiliated with the League and also with the Citizens League, when Homer Taft, who is a citizen, gave his testimony about this particular issue. One of the things that we heard on the commission was about turnout and concern in particular in turnout on primaries. We heard testimony about how the primaries, how the districts were set up in the original drafting of the charter, and we did hear testimony from people who said that they would like to promote bipartisanship on the council, which we were pleased to hear that they were thinking about trying to create diverse voices in county affairs. But what they suggested was that they drew up the districts in particular that would favor one side or the other. And as the League, who was sitting on the panel, and myself, that caused some concern in saying, you know, how can we, number one, increase turnout in the primary, and then how can we guarantee that you would have all sides of the political spectrum participate in the process, not just in the general election, but also in the primaries. Turnout in the primary of May of 2010 was 23.81%, and turnout in this past primary was 21.07%. So actually, as increase of awareness of county affairs, we actually saw a decrease in participation in the primary system. And so this is one of the alternatives that has been floated as an opportunity to expand the participation of voters in the primary election, as well as to increase the voice of those who may not necessarily align themselves with a political party or may align themselves with two aspects or aspects of different political parties. And this was one proposal in which Nancy and I felt strongly, and we submitted our names in the minority report on this. So I'm available to answer any questions that you may have, and thank you for the opportunity.
Okay, great. Any questions from the committee of Mr. Tarter? Hearing none, thank you. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Strawn.
Yeah, as long as Mr. Charter's up there. In regards to your analysis as a Charter Review Commission, did you go through any of the same kind of things that we do up here, or did, in that how many items that we brought forward out there versus everything that would be supported? In other words, did this item, was it discussed and vented throughout the other members of this in regards to it?
You know, there were well, thank you very much to the chair and Councilman Tron. I will say that we discussed a wide variety of issues. Some came from County Executive Fitzgerald, some came from you, some came from the citizens, and we heard a lot of testimony. What we didn't have was really the opportunity to vet a lot of those proposals that came forward. There were some we were able to give a significant amount of analysis to, such as the clerk of courts and the inspector general. And there were other things that, while we felt were good proposals, needed to have some more research done. And one of those items, you may recall, was campaign finance, where there was a lot of different diverse opinions, and there needed to be some really significant research, in which we forwarded the proposal to council to say, hey, we really think this is something that should be done, but may necessarily need some more time to vet. And so in this particular proposal, I would suggest that we did talk about the nonpartisan primary and really some of the good things and bad things that come about from that. But we didn't feel strongly enough that this was a proposal that we all could vote in confidence, had the research necessary to back it. I mean, we're talking about a huge decision here, and in the confines of the commission, we weren't comfortable voting as a total body to support it. Not yet, at least.
Thank you.
Great. Any other questions from Mr. Tarter? No? Any comments from my colleagues? Mr. Brady?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to ask a couple of questions, first of all, to either the sponsor or whomever. If this proposal were to be voted on favorably, what I'm trying to understand is what the status is of minor parties. I know 4 years ago, we had, in my own race, I'm not sure what happened in other folks' race, I had an independent, that's not a minor party, but I had an independent. They had, certain thresholds they had to reach to get on the ballot. I had, of course, the major party, which is a minor party in my district, the Republican Party. I had a Green Party candidate, and I can't remember. I think I had a Libertarian candidate. There were 8 candidates, and so I ended up with a primary with 4 or 5 candidates, and then I ended up with a general election with almost as many candidates. And I'm wondering, what the threshold is. I mean, if does this mean, as I would assume it would be, that the top 2 vote getters in the primary would advance to the general election, regardless of whether they were Green, Independent, Republican, Democrat, Libertarian? Would there be a special cutout for independents, or would independents no longer have the ability to advance directly to the general election ballot without running in what we'll call a nonpartisan primary?
Yeah, this would be, this follow a similar model that's actually being done like in California at this point in time. Top 2 vote getters, it could be 2 Democrats, it could be 2 Republicans, it could be 2 independents. Whoever results in the highest vote coming out of that would then square off in November. Yeah, and regardless of what party or party affiliation would be, there would be no party affiliation on the ballot. So it could be.
So the way this would probably practically play out, although no one can ever say, the way this would probably practically play out is that since the folks who drew the charter with some specific goals in mind besides just geographical continuity. They drew districts that deliberately made room for 3 Republican members of the council to be likely to be elected, and that was thought through. It's not an accident. I don't think anybody would say it is an accident, and I don't have an objection to that. But I think it's something worth stating that built into the charter was a recognition of making sure that the Republican Party, the other major party in the county, have a place at the table. I think that there's no question that this in some ways would broaden the electorate in all of the districts in the general election. And there's a positive aspect to that that I can see. It's also true that in some ways it might. The other side of that is that if I'm getting the endorsement of my party, that won't necessarily be on the ballot as a D, but as I'm getting the endorsement of my party, and I am through various forms of communication, primarily direct mail, getting the endorsement of my party. My party puts out a piece of literature that says they endorses me, at least with people for whom that matters. That still gives me, if I'm that person, some would say, an advantage over other candidates in my own political affiliation. And I would assume, although I'm not sure the way things are going these days, whether that's also true of the Republican Party as well. Does that work that way, or does it work the other way?
I mean, if we're talking the historical past, it obviously is something that could be endorsed.
I'm sorry. I was being only slightly sarcastic because of the
significant
no,
sarcasm.
the rise of the obvious rise of the faction within the Republican Party that's been so widely discussed in this country over the last few years. But I have to say that I think actually that this is a good proposal, and that that it's probably what people who framed the charter would have recommended at the time. It is a high hurdle for a majority party to deliberately give its opposition an advantage that it would not otherwise have. That's not very common. My only question might be whether in the middle of a county executive race, I know we must have at least one person in the room who's very focused on that fact, that whether this would be an appropriate time to have that discussion. But I do think that if we're honest and not just partisan, that we would see that this would probably result in a broader electorate being involved in the county council's elections, and therefore would probably be a positive thing.
And I would agree with my colleague, Mr. Brady, because when you hear a number of 21% participating in primaries, we can't be very happy when almost 80% of our populace of registered voters has taken a pass. And so when you talk about a block of voters out there, almost 50% of the independents had no voice in who's going to appear on the ballot in the council districts or in the county executive race. And I think that's. Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah.
Councilman, I thought that something I saw earlier, for some reason, had this proposal attached to a proposal about fulfilling vacancies in council. I got confused about that, apparently. That was never the case.
No, the intent was not to have it attached to that, but it does obviously then, if you remove party from the affiliation, then should any of us as council members step down, then under the current method, the party actually puts forth the replacement.
Right.
So
I'm
that
well
would be the
aware
only
of
place
that.
of the vacancy issue.
I know, and it's based on the way vacancies were filled, as you know, by both parties forever. What I want to, I guess, understand then, is this or is this not attached to the legislation as it's being proposed?
This is a separate standing, this would be a separate standing piece of action.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
It's part of but it stands on its own as far as the strength of whether or not you eliminate.
I mean, I need to know exactly what we're putting on the ballot.
Let me ask this, Mr.
Yeah,
Trump, could
not,
you
I
just
mean,
explain?
whether the two ideas stand alone or not.
Yeah, Mr. Sean, if you can just explain the charter amendment itself, the proposal itself.
Yeah,
As it's written. And that way, I believe this issue of filling vacancies is addressed in the,
Well, it's pretty simple, is it or not, on there? I mean,
yeah, this is addressing changing elimination of the party. By doing that, then you must change the way in which the vacancy would be fulfilled, because the party was the method in the past. So that method.
what method then? And then I read the rest of it, and that's where I got, like, I was with you there, for a while, and then as I went on, and it started to get into 5 electors or something of a committee deciding who the
General law. We
vacant was.
lifted that language from the general
Well,
law.
I know that I've seen and heard of that, but it's then I think we're running in the other direction of it having a less democratic system to fulfill vacancies. What I've always been for in that regard, because I did understand the deficit of the traditional approach, was that that there would be a special election would be held to fill a vacancy in a council. I think that would be easily if we're talking about more people participating, that follows more in the spirit of more people participating. So that's what I would be for in that regard. Again, if in terms of its interpretation as you put it in, that wouldn't be something that I would be for.
Mr. Tarter.
Mr. Chair, just for clarification purposes, the Charter Review Commission considered 3 different aspects of removing party affiliation from the charter. The first one is removing party affiliation from the Charter Review Commission, in which case it mentions majority party and minority party. We chose to keep that composition of there, so we didn't take out affiliation entirely from the charter. We did separate the nonpartisan primary proposal as well as the council vacancy proposal into 2 separate pieces for that very reason. Some people felt strongly about the nonpartisan, and some people felt more strongly about the council vacancy proposal. So for clarity, we did submit 2 separate minority reports on those 2 issues, just in case there were people who felt strongly one way, yes, and maybe weren't in support of the other proposal. Thank you.
Very good, thank you.
Yeah. And obviously the vacancy is the issue that always you run into as far as how do you fill a vacancy. And fortunately, that doesn't come up all that often, and which we did have it occur with in the particular case here. The general law does have a committee elected, named in your ballot, of 5 individuals that would be a position where we'd be following the general law principles in regards to that, assuming that whether it came from a party or it came from the 5 individuals that you would name, the idea being that that would be similar philosophy to whoever it is that was being elected by the people from that area. And I'm very flexible to find out if there's a better way or what is the most optimum way for the filling the vacancy slot. But that is, and I'm willing to accept an amendment in regards to how that goes forward. The concept of eliminating the partisanship was the keystone to where this conversation is.
Well, Mr. Chairman, to Mr. Schrein, I would only say finally in the regard to the second part of the proposal, that I would definitely want to have those discussions separately in terms of anything we would consider to put on the ballot. And again, I'm a little concerned that both of these proposals, but particularly the second part of the proposal, also lends itself in this, in the middle of this election cycle, to some distraction and maybe some misinterpretation of what the council's trying to say in regard to the second issue, given the vacancy that occurred this year and the fact that, of course, the charter was followed in terms of how the vacancy was filled. There would be no other way it could possibly have happened, given that it was in the charter, which I think most of us claim to have voted for.
Well, the difference is even on this one you're referring to, I believe had it been, and we have the law director here, had it been one day different, you would have had a special election. Is that the correct interpretation of that?
Trying to remember. I think you're correct. Honestly, I'm trying to
Yeah,
remember. I know there was a time period as to when the vacancy occurs.
Right. Had it really gone as you had suggested, one day different would have made for that special election that you were suggesting is the preferred alternative out there.
Right.
But we
Okay.
didn't.
Well, this is an interesting proposal, and so I've had my say.
Yeah.
Mr. Germana.
I've got a few questions in my mind, and in particular, because I'm not familiar how in these cities that are nonpartisan, so if someone's running for a council seat in a nonpartisan, in the primary, are they identified as Democrat or Republican?
No.
Just the city of Cleveland.
Right. City of Cleveland.
City of Cleveland's the biggest example.
Right.
Of the nonpartisan race for mayor and for council. The top two vote getters advance to the general election.
But they're,
It's identical to the city of Cleveland as far as the way in which you follow that.
so there's no identification of party at all.
We have two members. I think they've both been members of Cleveland City Council here.
The, so knowing that, let me just say that not all Democrats think alike, and certainly not all Republicans think alike. We know that. But in general, if you're a Democrat, there's certain values and principles that you're for, in general. And the same thing for Republicans. There's a certain philosophy. But independence, there is no philosophy. What's the philosophy of an independent? The philosophy of an independent is they can't weigh in so much for a Democrat or so much for the Republican Party that they don't want to be tagged. But they're not standing up for anything. So I think identification by party is important because it identifies what somebody stands for. So in that regard, in the vacancy, the only way I would vote for this is that in the case of the vacancy, and I don't know how we would do this, but I think it's important that the party picks the replacement. I happened to get, because I was interested to see how the districts lined up as far as Democrat, Republican, and Independent. And I actually just, got the information over the weekend, and with being my son's birthday and parties all weekend, I just kind of copied these things down. In eight of our districts, it's unquestionably Democratic. I mean, it ranges from 3-1 to 14-1. So take, for example, in a district that's 14-1, the chances of it not being two Democrats running in the general election, it would be almost ridiculous. So this is, yeah, the other, I asked, different people, in particular, how they felt about this. And one of the problems in the past we've had in Cuyahoga County, in particular, is the name game. So that's a problem. If you don't have a party identification and affiliation, and in most cases, independents that, I think Democrats and Republicans get more information about their candidate than independents get about candidacy. So one of my problems with the history of Cuyahoga County, where the name game makes a difference, practically in every district, the independents are equal to or outweigh the political parties. So I'm just wondering if this helps the election or hampers, and we're involved in the name game. So I'm still undecided on this. I like the idea of the fact that I feel I represent all the people in District 4, regardless of what party they belong to. And in looking at my numbers, it's one-third are independents. So, you know, I think that one-third really did not have a say in picking the candidate, because in most of the time, in 8 out of the 11 districts, you know, it was just who the Democrat was going to be. So that's a couple of my thoughts about this.
All right, very good. Any other? Ms. Simon?
The only comment I want to make is that it's a fallacy that people could not participate in the primary because of their lack of a party affiliation. It's really easy to go ahead and register as a particular party for purposes of a primary to vote if somebody's so inclined. So I don't believe that that's the case, that we need to have a charter amendment to persuade people to vote in a primary. It's really easy. You just go and you sign up and you vote in the primary, and free to vote in the general election how you choose.
Okay. Mr. Germana?
Sonny, I agree with you, Councilwoman. In actuality, independents don't get a lot of information in a primary. Unless you're independently wealthy, if you're trying to win a primary, you campaign to the people that vote in the primary. So I'm just thinking that independents generally are not going to get information from candidates, or they may get information from the more well-funded candidate. And I don't know if that's good for democracy. Neither way is going to be perfect, I understand, but I really feel that Democrats stand for something, Republicans stand for something, and without that identification, there's the potential that the name game may prop up in a countywide election.
Mr. Mr. Hairston. Mr. Hairston.
Chuck's point about independents not getting information, well, there's Google. I believe the voter has to have some ability to research these candidates themselves. I believe that we have newspapers, we have other outlets for these independent voters to get information. They chose to be independents, and in some cases, they in one respect, you chose not to get information that is critical to help you make your decision. I believe removing party identification from the ballot is another way to move a piece of information that helps voters when they go into the ballot box. Back in 2012, when the presidential election was there, about 45,000 people voted in that election, and for either Obama or Mitt Romney when they ran. The next very category up under them are the nonpartisan Supreme Court race. There's no party affiliation there. 200,000 less people voted for that race. That is your next largest nonpartisan race after the presidential race. And 200,000 people voted less in that race. You know why? Because that voter ID was not there to help them identify who these people were. Yes, most of us identify with a party who best we align not totally, but somewhat with the views and values that they have, or the platform that they stand on. So I think it's very important that we keep that the party affiliation ID on the ballot, because it is another piece of information that help voters when they step in that ballot. We talk about disenfranchising, so we're moving to the council vacancy. We want to replace the Central Committee members with a 5-member nominating committee. Is that correct, Mr. Sharon?
It follows the general laws rule that you would name 5 members from your committee to be identified. And I assume, like the suggestion was, they would be of a similar nature to what you are, which is no different than what your party affiliation potentially could be, and they could all be selected from your individual party if you wish to.
Let me say this, I've went through the process.
Of a vacancy.
The latest replacement to this council, and I think the process has been very well. I was selected out of it was 80 Central Committee people that participated within that process. All of them had information, all of them made informed choice. There was no backroom deals, no okey doke on anybody to vote for me at all. The people got into the room and made their decision based on the information that they had, based on the information that they researched about each and every person that participated. And to remove 80 people from that process to 5 people, when we talk about disenfranchising people, that is clearly what we're doing. Every Central Committee member are elected by people within their community. So not only do you take the vote from the Central Committee members themselves, you take the information or the ability that they have given to their precinct people that they've elected in their community. So you're removing other layers of this process as you begin to dig deeper. So I don't get going from 80 to 5, and what why would you support that?
If we can acknowledge that 2 members of this body have served on a nonpartisan basis, where they were in for city council for the city of Cleveland, and it worked for them. If we can acknowledge that it works in 56 of our 59 communities, that it works for them for their replacement, to find a replacement as opposed to the objection to the concept is really what the issue is. If you're, I'm not adverse, as I said to Mr. Brady, as far as on the replacement, if we want to come up with some other method. But it is that there's no question that 21% participation in the primary is not something we can be very excited about as a body. We can't be thrilled about the fact that nearly 80% of this community did not participate in the primary. I would disagree with my colleague, Mr. Germana, that independents don't have any points of view and therefore don't have anything that they believe in. I truly believe that if you challenge that to independents, they might push back that they do have beliefs. They might be a blend between different points of philosophy, but I can almost guarantee you that they have beliefs out there. And if it's working in other states, and if it's one of the areas that I don't historically circle around California as the be-all and end-all, but it is an area in which we are seeing that nonpartisan races are starting to go that direction to get a higher degree of participation. Why wouldn't we, as a body, encourage higher participation? If it turns out that 2 Democrats end up on the ballot, then so be it. If 2 Republicans end up in my district, then where's the harm been in regards to that? The name game that Mr. Germana raised, I mean, it's obvious that the name game has been around in this county for years, and whether or not you use a name that's a popular name here in this community, it doesn't matter whether or not we're using independents, whether you're using a party, or make it nonpartisan. If people are going to vote by name, they're going to vote by name regardless in that respect. And we can see it time and time again. Sometimes you'll even have people that are indicted individuals that end up getting higher votes out there because of name ballots out there. So that's not going to change under any system. So that would be my comments in regards to that. Everyone is free to vote. Yeah, everyone's free to vote in regards to this. As a matter of fact, they were actually a higher degree of participation for when Ms. Simon said, oh, they all have to do is pick up a ballot. No, you're asking them to make a declaration when they pick up that ballot to have to choose between one party and another. For some reason, almost 50% of this population is choosing not to pick up a ballot for a party.
The numbers don't lie. 2012, those were the numbers. That's the participation that we received once the next section to vote on, where the D and the R was removed from next to the name. That's what we got. 200,000 less people voted for that race. And that's what we will continue to get if we remove the party identification from the ballot. And if we are attempting to increase voter participation, I think you must keep party identification to help when person is in that ballot box going to vote. That is simply another piece of information to help them when they go to cast their vote.
Very good. Mr. Germana?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just briefly, you know, in my verbiage, if I indicated that I thought independents don't have values or beliefs, that is far from what I was trying to say. All I was trying, because I know they do, because they do vote. Independents do vote. That's because, you know, they're independent because they voted in a general election or in a nonpartisan primary. What I was trying to say is, by having an I by their name, you don't know what they stand for. And at least with D and R, you know what core principles they stand for. So please, independents that are listening, I don't believe the philosophy that you don't have strong beliefs and values. I'm just saying that the I doesn't identify what those values are.
Okay, Mr. Gallagher, then Ms. Simon, then Mr. McClure.
To Mr. Harrison's point, I'd just share a happening from Strongsville when the mayor was unopposed and a nonpartisan forgot to put the 5 names down, died after filing, and had a write-in citywide. It was a mess. It was, and money was flying. So just to your point on that it can happen. It can get bad.
Ms. Simon?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So if this body is truly concerned about voting participation, voter participation, this is not the way to do it. The way to do it is to, when we get to the voting right charter amendment, that clearly is a way to expand the voting population by really ensuring that applications for by mail votes can come in to embrace and enfranchise voters. So if we really, really are looking to increase the voting participation in this county, it's not by removing the party designation at all. That really is a subterfuge, I think, for other ideas. But if you truly, really believe it, I expect and would see that the board here is going to support, or I'm going to ask them to support the voting rights amendment to really make sure that that's the effect we're going to get, if that's what our desire truly is.
Mr. McClure, just, you weren't here last week, but when Mr. Boyle asked to speak, I just asked that non-committee member comments just be brief.
The only thing I wanted to point out is a very procedural issue, which is a point of clarification that there are actually 2 proposals before council, both removing the nonpartisan affiliation. One of them, the replacement is through the county council. The other one is through the committee of 5. Just that they're presented to both of you as alternatives. That's all I wanted to clarify.
Okay. All right, thank you. I've been somewhat quiet in this, listening to the debate. This members of my committee will recall back in the first 2 years I brought this subject up of nonpartisan elections as a discussion point and was in favor of it. Then I still am in favor of it. The caveat I would make, and being a product of this, is the 5-person committee obviously seems to be a point of contention here. I'm not hearing that much contention on the nonpartisan concept, but if the replacement was to a special election, then you're putting it right back to the voters in the original form in which they elected the member who's seat is being vacant. So we have days till our next meeting that we may be able to discuss alternatives to this. There's no decision that's going to be voted on today. I don't mean to close with that, and I'm not intending to. If there are any other comments, Mr. Schron and then Mr. Jones.
Yeah, would be more than amenable to special election being tacked on at the next time. My purpose for picking up what is general law as far as the 5-member committee was only to try to minimize the cost to the taxpayers for that period of time. If we could, if an amendment that would say that next special election at the next time a general election was being held would clearly have allowed us in this last situation to allow the voters to actually participate in taking a vote. And the same thing would be the case here. So I would welcome adding that as an amendment that says the 5-person is only to name in an interim period of time until the next general election, rather than having it being appointed by the body of 11 up here, which is the alternative, or the body of 10 at that point in time, as would be the case.
We go to Mr. Jones. Mr. Harrison, Mr. Brady.
And first, I just want to apologize for coming in late. I was at an event in my district. But I'd just like to weigh in on this particular resolution and echo the comments of Councilwoman Simon and Councilman Anthony Hairston. From a broad picture, I'll say if our goal is to raise voter participation, I think it's just important to always remember the 3 major factors in why someone doesn't vote. It's age, income, and education. The lower those factors, the less likely someone is to vote. So when our goal is to increase economic competitiveness, those from a broad perspective are how we start to impact the economic well-being of the residents of this county, and all of the other factors around will again help to support to increase voter participation. But I have one councilman don't support this particular resolution.
Mr. Hairston.
Just to Mr. Schron's point, the people of November in District 10 has an opportunity to decide whether they want to vote for me or not. So I think after the appointment process, there is a time period for people still to make their decision of who they want to represent them in that point. So your point is null and void. But also, the RSC also states how the precinct people are empowered to choose a replacement for their political party that they identify with.
Mr. Brady.
I just wanted to hopefully finish off this discussion, maybe, because now we're getting into the little bit of the weeds with it, but that's where you would eventually have to go. The city of Cleveland's process, for instance, is that when the vacancy occurs, the council appoints temporarily the person, not a committee of 5, but the council appoints a person temporarily, and then within 90 days, not at the next general election, within 90 days, there is a special election. And within 40 days, there's a primary, and the top 2 vote getters, if there are more than 2 candidates, more than 3 candidates. And then the top 2 vote getters go to a general election within 90 days, so they sometimes not hold only 1 special election, but could potentially hold even 2 special elections under the system that they have in Cleveland. So just so it's, as long as we're talking about what the other options are, I wanted to make it clear what those options actually are in the city of Cleveland. Now, I think if it came to if the proposal to fill a vacancy on this body was for the council to fill the vacancy, I would have some concern over that if it were for a protracted period of time. If there were a special election within in a very short amount of time, I wouldn't have such a strong feelings about it. I actually would prefer a system like exists 99% of the time in Congress, and that's when a vacancy occurs, that there's a special election and the position is not filled at all until the special election is held. But I think with this body, with this county being so large, I don't feel like I should be deciding who the representative for Strongsville is going to be, or Westlake's going to be, or the Far East Side. It's just at that point it goes beyond, I think, something that I should have direct influence in.
Mr. Tarter.
Mr. Chair, just a quick point of clarification. At CRC, we also looked at what the current charter does say. In particular, section 3.06 on mentioning council vacancies with no party affiliation. When a vacancy occurs in a council position, the council shall choose a replacement within 30 days of the occurrence of the vacancy. If council fails to make a replacement within 30 days, the county executive shall make an appointment. This was one thing that we did discuss internally as well, and if we were comfortable with this particular language. Here was a thought process behind the minority report language that basically says, in the event of a council vacancy, of a partisan vacancy, of opening it up to all the voters as opposed to just precinct committee people, we basically said when a person votes for a council member, that council member is voted in the general election by people of all political parties and of all stripes. They may not necessarily be voting on the party, they may be voting on the person. And so when you make a replacement by the precinct people are a valuable component of the countywide system. But in our discussions, we said, do we want to have a special election or any type of open election that would allow everyone to participate regardless of political affiliation? So I would just put that out there, that this was something that we discussed, but we felt ultimately a special election would be the best way. But how could we increase the participation in the event of a vacancy and not have it fall particular upon party lines? And Nancy and I are both Democrats. We're both Democratic nominations to the commission, and so I just want to submit that to council for your consideration.
Okay, very good.
Thank you,
Chairman.
Mr. Brady.
No, I promised I wouldn't say anymore, but, you know, the one thing this is a very interesting conversation, and it shows that when you enter into a conversation that is by its nature partisan, you know, it's going to be a very different political discussion than ones that we're used to having here over the last 3.5 years. And I think, you know, one of the things that's a drawback, not to the concepts, but that, you know, for 3.5 years, this has been a surprisingly and amazingly bipartisan body. It's borne out in the fact that both parties chair committees, pass legislation, but I think this discussion, you know, in and of itself, just show how just under the surface, we could easily fall into a partisan debate, and something we should just kind of be aware of, because I think the voters seem to like what we've been doing.
Mr. Germana, and then Mr. Schron.
You know, I think it's got to be pointed out, the reason that we're not partisan in our deliberations on council is because what we're voting on is not partisan. Health and Human Services, you know, the needy, the drug addicted, the people without jobs, the bridges they cross, the roads we pave, the amount we tax people on their property has nothing to do with party, and we fixed that with the Board of Revision. That's why we're nonpartisan, because 99% of what we do here is nonpartisan issues, and we've been doing it fairly in the open with deliberation.
Mr. Schron.
And Mr. Germana, I could not have put the argument better than what you just said right there, because I agree implicitly that the county executive, when he is carrying out those actions, is nonpartisan. I agree 100% that when he is imposing or she is bringing forth those health and human service issues, those are nonpartisan. When the justice system is being supported, it's nonpartisan. When we're going out and looking for jobs and economic development and trying to bring jobs to this community, if ever there should be a nonpartisan position, it should be the chief executive of this county. Succinctly say why it should be that way, that there should not be partisanship to anything that's being done in supporting of county activities.
Mr. Harrison.
When you govern, I mean, you can govern nonpartisan, but I mean, you also, there's another side, and that's the political side. So that's why they're separate. Your policy is your politics outside of when you govern. You represent each and every person while you're in that position. I guess I'm confused here.
Mr. Chair, I think, I get with Mr. Harrison, if I may, is saying it's ironic now that we've been bipartisan now for 3.5 years, and we've operated that way, and now we're interjected now with politics by very virtue of the amendment. So I just find it ironic that we've been governing bipartisan, and now we need an amendment to make that happen. Instead, it's the reverse, where politics is coming out in full force in the discussion. Just some irony there.
No, last year, if we recall, we discussed this. We discussed this with the Board of Revision and suggested that we go all the way and eliminate from all positions. It was brought up, but we decided not to go and eliminate it all the way. So we did have this discussion. It did go before the voters, and they overwhelmingly supported to eliminate from the Board of Revision.
Okay, I'll tell you what, we've had great, healthy, spirited discussion. We've had opinions. I'm going to move on, Mr. Boyle. So what we're going to do, and this item will be brought up again in 10 days, and there may be an amendment or two coming forward, and we'll just address the issue further at that time. If the committee would mind taking a 5-minute break, and we'll come back and according to that clock, at the clock to the right of me, 2:40.